Well, hey guys, welcome. So glad that you're here for our next Redeem Her Time book club. For those of you who are just kind of wondering where we are and what we're doing in the book club right now, we are reading the book The One Thing by Gary Keller. Yes, he is the Keller as in Keller Williams. So if you want to kind of learn a little bit more about, his background and actually how he's applying this, he's obviously trained a lot of his people in this philosophy and so many good nuggets that we've been pulling out of here for us. So today we are talking about chapters 7 and 8, but I thought it might be good just to kind of go back and review where we've been, what we've covered. Always keeping in mind a couple of things I was thinking about this morning. Number one, we want to live a life of significance, right? We want to focus on what matters, and that's what this book is all about. The world is out there telling us, do all the things, add this, do this, like put more things on your plate. And yet, how does that end up making us feel? Overwhelmed, exhausted, frustrated, right? Because we can't do all the things. Like we're just physically not capable of doing that. So this book is helping us to remember that we want to focus on what matters most. And for those of us who also know that, we have a purpose greater than here, and this world is not, is just for a time. Our life here is just for a time. We want to make sure we're doing things that are going to matter long term, right? And what it is that we're doing. And here's the interesting thing. We all have 24 hours in a day, right? So we can't change that. So what we want to look at is how can I change where I put my focus so that I can get the most out of my 24 hours, right? But I do want to say this. I was thinking about this since our last book club. A lot of times books like this are leading towards productivity, right? About doing more and how much more can I fit into the time that I have. But I want you to hear my heart. My heart is not that we focus on the productivity, but that we focus on the purposivity. Yes, I made that word up. My daughter's like, Mom, that is not a real word. I'm like, I know, but where we're not just doing what will make us productive, we're doing what will make us purposeful. Okay, so I think there's a difference between those two. So let me just kind of open that up and just see like how that hits you when you think about the difference between being productive and being purposeful. What do you see as the difference between those two? Anything come to mind? Does one feel different than another?
I wasn't prepared for a question like that.
I know. I like to throw out doozies and like, but what's the first thing, what comes to mind when you think of productivity? Let me ask that.
Um,
Go
yeah,
ahead, Nikki.
Being active, trying to get things accomplished.
Okay, getting stuff done. Okay, Shayna, what were you gonna say?
oh, I was along the same lines, just checking off all those to-dos, no matter what they are.
Okay.
Yep.
So just curious, do you associate a positive feeling or a negative feeling with productivity? Or maybe some of both?
I feel like there's some of both, because you can also feel accomplished if you're taking off a lot of things. But then it can also, if you don't take off the right things, if you don't have a purpose for taking off, it can also lead to some negative emotions. And I feel like probably the negative emotions a lot of times would be further on down the road. Like right now, I'm like, yes, I clicked off so many things, but then the negative emotion is going to be when you're, at later on, you're like, oh crap, but I didn't do and I didn't do.
Okay. Yeah, we look at the gap, right? We talked about the difference between the gap and the gain. So what we haven't done and what we think we should have done, right?
I just turned around, I'm like, you're in my Zoom. And he's like, oh, my bad.
He perfectly placed himself right there. I thought it was on purpose, actually, but.
Well, no, we moved into a new office. And as of right now, he has to walk behind me to get to his desk, which is not often, but.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, sorry.
He can just wave on his next time passed or whatever. What kind of feelings come up for you, Nikki, when you think about productivity?
I think of it as a positive thing. A sense of accomplishment, maybe success. It depends on what it is you're doing. You could get, all kinds of good things, but I got to answer this phone.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead. And I think you guys have both hit on it. Like, it can be a positive thing if we're being productive about the right things, which is what we've been talking about, right? Are the right things on our list, or are we just doing things because they're on our list? And I think sometimes what happens with productivity is we start tying our meaning to what we are producing, right? That's what productivity, the root of it is. And so then when we're not producing in the way that we think we should, or we think we could, or we think, you know, someone has an expectation of us or whatever, then sometimes that can make us feel like there's not as much value there because I'm not being productive enough, right? Whereas with purposivity, it's really coming down to who are you being, right? What are the things that really matter most? What are the things that really are deep down in here? And then making sure that those are the things that are getting your focus and your attention. Because there are a lot of productive people out there who are checking off their to-do lists all day long, but not really getting anything done, or anything done that matters, right? That's really going to move them in the direction they want to go. There's a lot of busybodies, busy people, but we're not going after that, right? We're going after, let me, number one, do the things that matter. And number two, let go of the stuff that doesn't. In fact, that's one of the quotes I want to share with you guys in a few minutes. So we talked a little bit in the beginning of the whole book about just what is this whole thing, you know, about this whole idea of the one thing. And we've been in this section right now about misconceptions. So in chapter 4, we talked about the fact we have this misconception, we believe, this lie that everything matters equally. And we talked about, this is where we talked about to-do lists and how we need to not just start at the top because that was the first thing we thought of, but we need to really say what matters most here, right? And really make it about focusing on those things. Then on chapter 5, we talked about multitasking and that being a way to be efficient. And we learned that when we're switching our attention back and forth between multiple things, we're really not very effective. And so we're actually wasting a lot of time. In chapter 6, we talked about feeling the need to have more discipline and how we already have all the discipline that we already need. It's just really a matter of how we are managing ourselves, right? And the habits that we're creating. So a disciplined person looks like they've got discipline, but really they just have habits and routines that they've created around the things that are important, right? So it's always coming back to what matters most. Then in chapter 7, we talked about the fact that willpower is on will call. And we often believe like, oh yeah, I can just decide, right? That this is what I'm going to do, or this is what I'm not going to do. But if you were with us last time, which was actually last week, we talked about later on in the day, when your brain and your body has gone through a lot of decision-making, a lot of thinking in your day, it is way harder to say yes to the things that you really want to do. This is why after 7 o'clock, nobody's craving broccoli, right? Nobody's craving that big salad, right? After 7 o'clock at night, you want the sweet, the salty, the crunchy, you know, something like that. Your brain is like, I don't really care if I had a health goal right now. I just want what feels good because I'm so tired of making decisions and doing all the things all day. So we default to what's comfortable. So this week, we're going to be talking about chapters 8 and chapter 9. The first one is our need to find balance in life, which I think is a really interesting one. I'm looking forward to that one. And then the chapter 9 is about big is bad. Okay. So in chapter 8, we'll start there. It starts off with saying this quote: "Nothing ever achieves absolute balance. Nothing." So I'm going to kind of throw that out there and ask those of you who are on live, or if you're listening to the replay, to think about, do you agree with that statement? Very first line on page 72, nothing ever achieves absolute balance. Nothing. Would you agree with that statement?
I would
Disagree?
I would. Yeah, no, I feel like it's more trying to achieve that balance in your life, and making sure everything is balanced is where I feel like I'm the least happiest because I'm pursuing something that I'm never actually truly going to have.
Or if you do, it's like for a millisecond, right? Where you feel like you have that balance, and then everything kind of all of a sudden feels like it shifts, and
right.
It's elusive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet we always hear you need to have a balanced life, right? Make sure that you have a balanced life. Make sure you find balance in all these areas. And so I love how he starts off by saying that balance is really an act of balancing, right? Balancing is an ongoing, ing verbs are like happening right now, like ongoing, right? So it's not like, well, I've gotten there and now I'm just going to stay on that one spot where I'm teetering right at the exact fulcrum so that my teeter-totter is straight. but life is going to happen. And so it's going to mean those adjustments. And later on in here, they talk about the illustration of a ballerina and how it looks like she's balancing on her toes. But if you look really closely, she's actually just shifting her weight back and forth to accommodate for the way that her body is moving. But it's this illusion, like you said, of something that we're really not going to get there. And it says here, balance is actually something we constantly do, right? And something that we always need to remember that that it is an ongoing thing, and not trying to find that one place that's going to make that exactly happen. So, okay, where was I looking? Okay, on page 73. Okay, so it's interesting because we've been talking about 7 areas in our life, and I'm actually adding an 8th one this year that I'm going to start talking about that I think really relates to women. But if you were to take, there are 1,440 minutes in a week. No, 1,440 minutes in a day. Sorry. If you were to take that and just for easy math, divide it by the 7 areas we've been talking about, the 7 F's, that means you would have to give 205.7 minutes to each one of those areas, right? Like, so think about it. Would that really be a balanced life if you gave 205 minutes to your faith, 205 minutes to your family, 205 minutes a day to your friends, to your wellness, to your job, to your finances, to your fun? Like, that's not how we live, right? So this whole idea of balance, like, you would not stay balanced if you gave that much attention to some of those things and that little attention to other ones, right? So this whole idea he talks about here on page 73 is that time on one thing means time away from another, which is actually what makes balance impossible, right? How does that make you feel when you hear that when you spend time on one thing, that means that you will take time away from something else? What does that stir up in you? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm okay with it as long as I like where that time is going.
True. Yeah.
I think it only makes sense. I mean, you can't do all things at once.
Mhm.
So if you are, and it's like, okay, so if you're watching TV, you're taking time away from other things. But if you're sitting there with your family and it's a family event, then you're doing it as a family. So you're spending time with your family. So I think it all depends on what it is and whether, like she said, if it's what you want to be doing and you realize that 5 minutes or 10 minutes that you're spend doing this may not allow you to do something else, you have to prioritize.
Yeah,
exactly.
Wait, I feel like a good example is the last 2 weeks because I spent so much time preparing for that Christmas concert at church.
Right.
And, we had some discussions about that. Is it just for a season? And am I okay with spending that much time? And it was just for a season. It was a very exhausting 2 weeks, but it was so worth it. It was so much fun. But that season's over for a year.
Right?
I have 50 more weeks until next year. Until we start preparing for next year's. Yeah. So that time that I normally would spend with my family got taken away and got put into a different area. But now that time is back to my family. Tonight is family time. Tomorrow night is family night. Wednesday night is date night. Thursday night is family time again. So like I have that time back again for the balance that I needed.
Yeah. I love that. I love that reminder about the seasons, right? Because it can be a season, like a literal season, like a holiday season, or like, that type of thing. But sometimes it can just be, for this season of my life, this is where I need to put some extra time and attention because this thing really needs it, or this thing will, is going to, as this moves forward, this is going to impact the other areas of my life. And then checking in with the other ones, right? Because what you're doing now is you put a lot of time into that program, and now you're checking back in with your family relationships, right? And probably your own wellness, and sleep and health and things like that, because now you have the time to do that.
I feel like the problem is sometimes our seasons are so long and we forget what it's like to have certain aspects that we need. Like you have a baby, and we forget that there needs to come a time that season's only for a short amount of time. And then once you get past that season, you need to start adding in me time. And as moms and as wives, we forget to do that until they're old. And now you're like, what do I do? What do I even like? What do I even want to do with my life? And you forget those things because you've put so much time into that season, and most of the time I feel like we extend that season for too long.
Mm. That's really interesting. So that brings up a good question. How can we be intentional about checking in during our seasons to make sure that we're not neglecting areas that need our attention, right? Even though it may not get as much attention, making sure that we don't neglect it. And also, like you just said, making sure that that season doesn't last too long.
That is a good question.
I was just talking with a
Lots
friend
of
of mine
prayer.
this morning who actually lives on the other side of the world. So it's so fun to be able to work with people who are all over the world. And I was telling her about the concept of the 12-week plan. And this is something that I've adopted where you look at your your life in 12-week chunks. So I call them seasons because it doesn't necessarily have to line up with, an exact quarter in the year or whatever, but kind of this is the next season, right? And this is where my main focus is going to be in this area. Here's what I'm going to do to maintain these other ones. But then here's the beauty of it. And this really struck her. And she was like, Lisa, this is a nugget you just gave me. On week 13, you rest, reflect, and renew. Right? Like I think we need to build in those regular rhythms of like checking back in. Because like you said, that season can end up lasting way longer than it should. And if we have not been checking in with ourselves and checking in with some of the areas that might need our attention, then it may be a really long time, right, before we come back and address that. So having some kind of a regular rhythm of, at least once a season, at least every 12 weeks, which is about every 3 months, checking in with taking an hour, just checking in. How am I doing in these other areas? What are things that need a little attention right now? How can I, start putting some of those into my priorities so that they're not just sitting over here neglected. And that may kind of then change. You may still be in a season, like you said, of little kids, but it doesn't have to look the same, month after month, year after year for 18 years. Certainly they're going to grow up and each season's going to be a little bit different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which really kind of made me think about kind of near the end of this. I really liked this. So they go into talking about the extremes, right? And how when we stay in the middle, we stay in our comfort zones and not many things really happen in our comfort zones, right? We just kind of barely kind of push ourselves on one side or the other. We're going to pretty much stay the same. What happens is when we get a little bit more extreme, which sometimes we think about that being a negative thing, but it can also be a positive thing. That's where the growth happens. That's where the change happens. That's where big things happen because we're giving it enough time and attention for it to really have that happen. But what I found really interesting is at the end of the chapter, they started, instead of talking about balance, talking about counterbalance. So let's look at that because it's going to tie into, Shana, what you were just sharing there about the seasons and like things in our personal life. So if you look on page 79, here's where the example of the ballerina comes in. So it says, if achieving balance is a lie, then what do you do? The answer is a one-word sentence: counterbalance. Replace the word balance with counterbalance, and what you experience makes sense. Things that we presume to have balance are really just counterbalancing. The ballerina is a classic example. When the ballerina poses on point, she can appear weightless, floating on air, the very idea of balance and grace. But a closer look would reveal her toe shoes vibrating rapidly, making minute adjustments for balance. Counterbalancing done well gives the illusion of balance. So let's kind of dive into this whole idea of counterbalance and what that means. Was there anything specific that came up for you when you were reading this section before we kind of talk about how it relates to us?
I don't remember now.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, when it goes in, it says, when we say we're out of balance, we're usually referring to a sense that some priorities, things that matter to us, are being underserved or unmet. The problem is that when you focus on what is truly important, something will always be underserved. No matter how hard you try, there will always be things left undone at the end of your day, your week, your month, your year, and your life. When the things that matter most get done, then you'll still be left with a sense of some things being undone and that imbalance. So like Nikki was saying earlier, like being okay with the fact that some things just aren't going to get done. And as long as they weren't as important, like that's okay. And that's where it says counterbalance comes in, because what the whole key of counterbalancing is on page 80, is that you never go so far that you can't find your way back. And you never stay so long that there's nothing waiting for you when you return. Right? So here's where, Shana, momhood, right, could literally last 18 plus years. And I think for a lot of women, it does, right? Because they're just in mom mode. It's like blinders on, and I'm just a mom, and I'm just a mom, and I'm just a mom. And then we end up getting so far away from, like you said, who am I? What do I even like in life? What am I doing? What matters to me, right? We've lost connection with ourselves, and we don't come back there often enough, then it's really hard to get back. If we can not go so far, stray so far away, or keep checking back in, then it's going to keep it's going to keep the illusion of balance going on there.
Yeah.
And this is what I thought was really interesting. So as they kind of talk about what does this look like, they said whether or not to go out of balance isn't really the question on page 81. The question is, do you go short or long? Now here's what I thought was really interesting. I'm curious as to what you guys think about this. So on page 81, it says, in your personal life, go short and avoid long periods where you're out of balance. Because going short lets you stay connected to all the things that matter most and move them along together. Right. So not letting your finances go way out there for too long, not letting your relationships go untended, not letting your fitness, your wellness, your fun, those different areas we've been talking about go too long. But then when it talks about the professional life, in your professional life or in your work goals, go long and make peace with the idea that the pursuit of extraordinary results may require you to be out of balance for long periods. Going long allows you to focus on what matters most, even at the expense of other lesser priorities. So the whole idea in your personal life, go short so you can keep checking in, but in your professional life, go long, because on those extremes is where you're going to really see results happen. So I just kind of want to open that up and say, how does that sit with you when you think about that or hear the difference that the author, Gary Keller, is making between how we approach balance in our personal life and how we approach it in our professional life? What are your thoughts on that?
I felt like, so I tried doing short inside of professional, and the last chapter, which was not last chapter, the disciplined life or organized life, because of me trying to do short and not being organized, I felt like it failed me.
Okay.
And it took a business coach coming in saying, let's rethink how you do business and how you do your life within your business, that it took us to refocusing and getting longer periods and actually feeling success before we actually were successful. And now that we are getting to the point where we're successful, it's definitely helped 100%.
Wow. What a great example. And what have you done in your personal life? Is it better for you to go short or go long periods?
I'm going to say it's probably better that I go short, but then I don't. I feel
right,
like
what we know
do
to
the
do and what we
opposite
actually
there.
do. Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I definitely do neglect things a little bit too long in the personal life when I need to not be neglecting it as long. Thankfully, right now I have teenagers to be like, okay, you need to get my life in check, so do this for me.
Right. Yeah. It helps when they grow up and move out of the house, right, Nikki? Nikki's smiling because she's like,
But I won't always have that.
yeah, right. Yeah. For sure. Yeah, that's I love that. Nikki, what are your thoughts on this whole idea of like in your personal life, having more shorter periods of times, making sure you keep coming back and checking in with those things versus in your professional life, really going all in, and giving it the time to kind of maybe go a little extreme in something in your business, because I know you've got a business you're working on and things like that.
Am I back?
You're on.
Yeah. I probably tend to devote more time to business and work than I do me personally. Probably a workaholic, if the truth be known. So, I would say the time that I do spend on me is probably short. I'm trying to make that better, not necessarily being uber successful, but working with the coaches and stuff, I am trying to do more of that and make more time for me. I think it's a work in progress.
Yeah, we always are, right? We are always. And that's what I love about-
Nonstop.
Yeah. How often are you coming back to the center to check in, right? Because the more often we're coming back, we don't want to come back so often that we never make any progress, right? Because that can be the other extreme of it. But we don't want to come back so infrequently that it takes a lot of extra work to get back there. And remember, Nikki, I think you brought up a really interesting thing as I was listening to you. It's not always about equal amounts of time. It's about so we talk about like the whole idea of quantity versus quality, right? So yes, you may spend 8+ hours doing work each day and maybe only 2 hours with your granddaughter, right? But in that 2 hours, right, are you fully present? Are you making her that priority? Like that's going to matter more than I gave 8 hours to my work today and only 2 hours to my granddaughter. That does not mean you don't love her because she didn't get equal time, right? So I think that's where we have to look a little bit at that balance.
Well, and I know we've discussed this, and I think it was last week about making sure that you're not, I don't remember the exact word, but basically punishing yourself because you think that you've not done the right thing. Because usually when we punish ourselves, we're less likely to go and do the right thing. I don't know why, but just
I think
I do. Like,
I think if you're punishing yourself, you're attaching a negative feeling to that activity. And who wants to go after something that you have a negative feeling attached to, right? We go towards the things that make us feel good, not towards the things that make us feel bad. So you're right. We oftentimes create that environment. So I think this is really interesting. So like I said, be watching this in your own life, right? In the work things you're doing. So Nikki, you're working on, your nonprofit, right? You have to really stay focused on that nonprofit. And it's going to take a lot of time, right? And a lot of focus and things like that, right? And so that's where that long focus is going to be really important because that's what's going to get you to what you want to do with that. Whereas things like with your health, you can't go long periods of time without thinking about it. You have to keep kind of checking in on those areas. So it's just kind of knowing, whether is this a professional thing or something that I can, really be extreme for a long period of time in this one area, or is this something that I have to just kind of stay kind of close to middle and kind of keep coming back? So just a really interesting way, to think about it and what it looks like to counterbalance in those different areas. What I love, just finishing up this chapter, and then we'll move on to the other one. When you're supposed to be working, work. And when you're supposed to be playing, play. I don't know how many of you are like I was, and sometimes I can fall into this, not as much as I used to. We'd be watching a movie and I'm sitting there on my laptop because I'm with the family, right? But I'm just going to get some work done while you guys are watching the family or watching the movie or whatever. But I wasn't serving them or myself in that. And of course I was distracted. So I wasn't getting my work done as well anyway. And then I was missing out on some of those opportunities and some of those funny moments and things like that because I wasn't, just fully playing when I was playing and fully working when I was working. Yeah. That was, it's only when you get your priorities mixed up that things fall apart. So a good reminder, right? As we're kind of checking in about things like that. So good.
I think that it's not even about work and play and play. It's about work and the distractions doesn't have to be play. Just like play, the distraction doesn't have to be work. Really focusing on the usage of your phone. Like we've talked about that last week also. Because how many times are we just on our phones, doing meaningless things on our phones versus being there and being in the present.
Right.
So that's something that, really, truly I've been working on for sure.
Yeah. I just read again yesterday in a book. I've heard this many times. It takes 23 minutes. We'll see in a minute, Nikki. It takes 23 minutes for you to fully get back focused to what you were doing when you stop to pause and do something else. 23 minutes to get back to that same focus that you had. Like that's where that distraction doesn't have to be play. It could even be even for me, sometimes it's the tabs open on my computer, right? So there are other projects I'm working on, they're work related, right? It's a good thing. It's something that I'm prioritizing. I know it matters, but sometimes just that it's there while I'm working on a different one is not, is taking my brain away, right? So kind of like, what am I focusing on in this moment, right? And getting our time and attention to that, which is why I love the time blocking method, because I can hyper focus on something for 25 minutes, take a break, right? And then I can move on to those other things that are there.
See, and time blocking in my type of atmosphere is super hard because I'm in a building with 19 other people and 2 to 3 when my husband's here in the same exact office.
Yeah.
And so being pulled away is so easy. So like even in the last week we use Slack for communication. I'm in over 100 Slack channels. And even in that instance, like people are tagging me or coming and saying, "Did you see?" And I'm like, "No, like I've not been in like normally like every 30 minutes to an hour, I open up Slack, seeing the important channels at least, what I've missed. And I've not been doing that. So like even those types of things, because those are the things that are drawing me away from getting tasks completed. From having that, what I would consider even in that instance, as close to balancing as possible.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'll be right back.
Yep. And that's, just an interesting point, because sometimes it's like every time a notification comes on our phone does not mean I have to check, you have to check it that moment. So what I like to do is I like to set times. So whether it's Slack, like it was for Shayna, whether it's a notification or an email or whatever, set times when you are going to check in on that. And I think that's really important to communicate those things to other people as well and say, hey, I'm going to check my Slack. I check it at, 8 a.m. I check it at 11 a.m. I check it at, 2 p.m. And then at 4, kind of let them know, here are the 4 times a day I will check
Yep.
it. So that way you're not constantly in and out and they're not bugging you about it.
Yep. And that's what I told them. I'm like, if it's going to be something, yeah, I was gonna say if it's going to be something super important, like I've missed a call or something like that, like you literally need to walk in my office and tell me.
Exactly.
Because I'm trying to stay
Yes.
and not do that. So.
Yep. Yeah. Right. It's always trying to figure out what works and communicating that with other people around you and just kind of tweaking it and being open to, this may not be in a perfect world exactly what I want it to be, but how can I make this the best that it can be for right now?
Yeah.
And keep growing towards that. So good.
Yep.
I love how you're always working towards those things. Okay. Chapter 9, the lie is big is bad. The Big Bad Wolf, Big Bad John, from folk tales to folk songs, the suggestion that big and bad go together has been a common theme in history. So it is quite possible that you have heard the idea that big is bad. Is that something that you, number one, have heard, and number two, you have believed that big equals bad? Or do you feel like, no, I'm pretty much able to look at something big and say that's not necessarily bad? It's kind of curious where you guys are coming in from.
Well, so as far as this chapter is concerned, I start out with the chapter going that I don't see how I can relate to this. And then once I got into it, I ended up sending individual text messages, because I do individual text messages to my kids, but I end up doing 2 different ones based off of this chapter, as well as I have a group in my office here that is all about growth and bettering themselves. So I send it to our Slack channel also. And the first thing I did in here, I don't remember where it was, it said 2 mindsets in action, a growth mindset that generally thinks big and seems supposed to be sees growth, and then a fixed mindset that places artificial limits and avoids failures. And whenever I saw it that way, I was like, that really truly makes sense. And it really hit hard with me.
I love that. And I love that you were sharing that there. Because you're right, big can open up a lot of possibilities, and yet we try to play small, right? We keep things, just like this because it feels safe, because it feels comfortable. So sometimes I think maybe the fear of the unknown can maybe make us fear something bigger. And then as you talked about 85, I thought this is interesting. If you fear big success, you'll either avoid it or you'll sabotage your efforts to achieve it.
Yeah.
Really interesting to think about, that we would actually undo our own stuff because it feels really big.
Well, you look at the people in this area, and it really truly has been we aren't worth anything in this area. We're not deserving of big things. We're not deserving of greatness. This area truly has a mindset of negativity and small, for sure. And I know there's plenty of other areas too, but I was sitting there looking at my life going, you know what? None of my family has ever made it to be a millionaire. I want to be the very first millionaire in my family. So like that was one thing that hit me this morning while I was reading this. Like in about 2 years' time, minimum, I will be there with the assets and the growth of our company. I, I'm going to be the very first millionaire in my family. So now how can I get my kids to be, I'm going to be a multimillionaire, but how can I get my kids to be the first billionaire in our family? Like, where can I take this
Yeah,
business and
like
take my mindset and take my growth and don't let big things stop me and hinder me. And then in the meantime, teach my team that. Like get my team where they want big and they want growth. They want, you know, where has your family never been that you can be the very first in your family? Let's break out of this Southern Illinois mindset and go to the next level.
yeah. Nikki, what have you found being in the community? I mean, you work with people like through the chamber and things like that, so you might run into like kind of the bigger thinkers in the area. But what do you find just when you think about your world? Do you find that a lot of people have big growth mindsets, or most people have more of a fixed, limited mindset, or kind of a little bit of both?
Some are big thinkers, but I would say on the average, no.
Majority.
The majority is just kind of like status quo. I mean, there's a few very ambitious people that I, have come in contact with, and I find them very interesting to talk to and, kind of hang out with. But I would say the majority, no, not so much.
This is how my family always has been, and this is where I will be whenever I die.
Yeah. We just had some friends stop by yesterday that we knew when we lived up in the Chicago suburbs, and our husbands worked together, and that he's being transferred down here as well. And so it's just interesting. I was telling her just what things are like here. And one thing, is like, yeah, this is where I've always been. I feel like there are so many people who are just like, well, this is where my family's always been. This is where I've always been. So this is where I'm staying, whether it's a physical location or, financial situation, or the type of job that we have or whatever. I think you're right. Sometimes it's just like, well, this is just how it's always been, and this is about as good as it's going to get. So I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other, and keep it there. So let me ask you a question for those of us who are growth minded, right? How do you see more limited thinking affecting you? Does it affect you when you're around them? Do you find yourself ever being like pulled into kind of like that, that's that putting a lid on yourself, or does it really just kind of alert you to, wow, I think really differently than the people around me? Or, I don't know, it can take us in all kinds of directions, but how do you find that it affects you?
Sometimes it's frustrating because it's like you're talking, or you're saying something and they squash whatever you're saying, or they're like, well, that's a dumb idea. I can't imagine why you'd want to do that. I mean, come on, who are you to think you can, this sort of thing. And sometimes it's sad because you look at them and think, really, that's the farthest you can make your mind go. Yeah.
Everybody has potential.
Sure.
If they would just open up their mind. I 100% agree with that. And that's where, like, with our team, like we just fired someone on Friday, and the biggest reason is she doesn't fit in here. She doesn't have the growth mentality, and no matter how much we talk to her and try to build her up, she'll never get past the world is here to beat me up mentality. And because of that, she doesn't fit in with my team. Like when my team looks at our 10-year growth, I want them to see themselves at the top. I don't want them to still see themselves at the bottom as just a CSR. What are the leadership positions that we're going to have open up, whether it's here, whether it's another state, that you are going to see yourself in? And what do we need to do to get you there? And if they can't see themselves in those positions, they don't really belong here. I want people that are ready to grow and get bigger.
Yeah. And this is where it's just such a reminder that who we surround ourselves makes such a difference. And maybe you aren't going to be like, spending, 24/7 with those people who are growth minded, but making sure that you are plugged into a community or to some relationships where you're able to kind of get that, like that place where you can show up and you know you're going to be lifted up, right? You know that like they're going to be matching your thinking, if not higher. They're going to be, you know, challenging you to go to the next level or cheering you on as you're doing that, and not trying to, you know, like the crabs, pull you back in the bucket, and things like that. So
I will say, you know, I've always heard it's lonely at the top, and I never really truly started feeling that until this last year, because the more I grow, the more people I see that don't want to grow. And I have to, like, I can still have a conversation with them, but I can't. I have to find people and finding people that are also growing is so hard.
yeah.
Finding people that, you know, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. They are out there, right? And thinking about where are they hanging out? You know, what kind of communities are they in, in person, whether it's, you know, some networking type communities and things like that, or whether it's an online community. But I think you're right. You know, like especially the more we get to the top, you know, it can be, there aren't as many people kind of where we are, but guess what? There's somebody else that's doing the same thing you are, who's kind of at that lonely top place somewhere else that would love to have that connection, right? Or finding a mentor or a coach or somebody who's just a little further ahead of you. Maybe it's, you know, in exactly what you're doing and the stage of life you're in, or maybe it's not, but just somebody who is on that path to continued growth. And then, you know, having intentionality with those relationships and making sure that you're doing that. Nikki and I have been a part of a community that meets on a regular basis, daily still. Are you still going to study club in the morning, Nikki? What difference has that made for you? Tell Shana a little bit about like what that's about and what difference it's made for you.
It's really interesting because there's people from all over the world now in this group, and we meet every morning at 6:45. And just all the different input and the different places where people, I mean, and different ages, predominantly all women in this particular group, but just, you know, and there's some that are just, you know, trying to figure out their and retiring, what to do with their life, and some that are very young and, you know, trying to figure out their careers. And some of them are very advanced spiritually, some not so much. And we do a mastermind group on the first Tuesday of the month. And that's really cool too. It's amazing the perspective that some of these people have. And it's like, oh my gosh, I would have never thought of that. And so it's real interesting that, you know, and the way we study, the way we think, it's very different. But yet it all works together.
And it fills you up for the day, right? And it gets you in that, because what do we tend to do? Oftentimes we'll pick up our phone and then we're listening to the news, which we all know is not usually going to take us in a growth mindset, or we're listening to somebody else's complaints, or, you know, whatever. Scrolling Facebook. Yeah. Things that aren't necessarily adding value or anything like that. And then that's what's filling us. And of course, that's what's going to come out of us. We often talked in that group about putting yourself in an environment conducive to the growth of your goal. Like get around other people who are also growing, and you will grow, right? I mean, you can't just sit there and do nothing, of course, but they will rub off on you and you'll rub off on them. And that's the beauty of all this, right? When we set the right types of goals and we put ourselves in the right kind of environment, we have to grow. So inside that community, we often talked about there are A goals, B goals, and C goals. So an A goal is, it's really easy. You've probably already done it before. Like maybe it's like, I'm going to lose 5 pounds. I've lost 5 pounds plenty of times. I can do that. I just have to decide and then do it and make it happen. A B goal is one that you haven't done before, but you can figure it out. You know, you can strategize how to get there. So maybe the most you've ever lost was 5 pounds. And so you set a goal for losing 10 pounds. Okay, well, if I do these things for twice as long, or I do these things more often, I can get to 10 pounds. You know, I can pretty much see that. A C goal is the type of goal where it's like, maybe the most you've ever lost is 5, and you say, I'm going to lose 75, right? That's like, oh my goodness, I have no idea how in the world I would even get there. But here's the thing. Those type C goals are the kind of goals that require you to become a different person, right? You're going to grow into the kind of person by the time you reach that goal who does lose 75 pounds, right? Who's been thinking differently and acting differently and seeing the changes. And he talked about this here too. He says, when you allow yourself to accept that big is about who you can become, you look at it differently. you start having new thoughts, bigger ideas, bigger beliefs, bigger, right? And it's like you grow to becoming that person, which is why it's so important who we surround ourselves with, because the old adage says you become like the 5 people you hang around with most. So we want to make sure that those 5 people, are people who are growth minded. And that's why I love that you've kind of been aware of that, even in your business, Shayna, to say, yeah, we don't want, one apple, poisoning all the others, right? And making them all rot. How can we make sure that we're always pushing each other towards that growth and towards becoming bigger than we were before? So I'm kind of seeing just what else pops out in here before we come out of here, talking about how, if we box ourselves in, then we're only allowing ourselves to grow so far, right? And so that being the real difference between thinking small and that those limited beliefs, as from the big thinking and kind of taking the glass ceiling
So
off.
I liked everything, that whole section on page 92. It says blowing up your life. And that was another one. I actually screenshotted that and sent that to all those people as well. It says big stands for greatness, extraordinary results, pursue a big life, and you're pursuing the greatest life you can possibly live. To live great, you have to think big. You must be open to the possibility that your life and what you accomplish can become great. Achievement and abundance show up because they're the natural outcomes of doing the right thing with no limits attached. Don't fear big, fear mediocrity, fear waste. Fear the lack of living to your fullest. When we fear big, we either consciously or subconsciously work against it. We either run toward lesser outcomes and opportunities, or we simply run away from the big ones. If courage isn't the absence of fear, but moving past it, then thinking big isn't the absence of doubts, but moving past them. Only living big will let you experience your true life and work potential. And I feel like even like with where I'm at now, like I'm not to a point where I can walk away from my business, but I will be. Give me 5-10 years and I can easily spend time on other tasks. And what do I want to spend my time on? Where can I best utilize my life, whether it is bringing more revenue in or if it's actually given to the community? So what are those community things that I can actually take our business and put our money into, whether it's something to help children in the system or helping elderly or helping, like, where can we put our money and our time in at those points when I have the time that I can spend away? So like thinking big.
Yeah, I love that.
Like,
Because a growth mindset is never done, right? A growth mindset isn't like, okay, check the box, I achieved that, and now I'm just going to coast. A growth mindset, and it may look different, right? At some point, you're probably going to retire and you're not going to do things to the same level you are. But it's always I've not yet arrived. How is God, calling me to step up? What would be even better? How can I, give in a bigger way or do some bigger things or help more people or, those kinds of things, which involves big thinking.
so John Maxwell was asked at this last conference in the fall. He said, he was asked, what do you plan on doing when you retire? And like, I don't know, he's like 500 years old. He said, I don't ever plan on retiring because God has called me for a purpose, and my purpose will not end until the day that I die. And like, even with us, like one of my kids asked me yesterday, he's like, well, you plan on retiring at some point, don't you? And I'm like, I don't know. Am I? Like, I may retire from working at this business and allow my kids to take over, but what's my plans after that? Like, I don't want to just sit on a couch and do nothing. Like, God has called us for a purpose. And what can I do for my entirety of my life?
Yeah. Yeah. And knowing that it may look different in different seasons, but it's I'm not done. God's not done with me yet. And we still have things to do together. So I'm going to end with this quote on page 93. It says, people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the only ones who do. Right? You look at anybody who's made a huge impact on this world, and let me tell you, people thought they were crazy and they went to extremes, right? And they went after big bad things, and they probably were out of balance for a while for a good purpose, right? And and really just not fearing that, but saying, yeah, like I love that, like fear the lack of living to your fullest. And, you know, when we know that God has, I wrote this down, I said, when it said extraordinary results on that page you just read, I said, why settle for ordinary when God put extraordinary inside of me? You know, like, I'm not going to just keep this all locked up. I'm going to let this get out and see what he wants to do with it. So such good conversations. I hope that's grown your thinking and helped you take the lid off of that and help you know that there are times in our life that it's okay for us to be a little extreme and out of balance. And then there are other parts that we need to kind of keep checking in and not get too far off, just to make sure that that we don't lose some things that are really, really important to us. So we are done with the misconceptions. Yay, we finished this section. It's always good to know, like, what do I not want to do? Because I think we all found ourselves, for those of us who've been reading along the whole time, or if you just jumped in, we have found every single chapter we could relate in some way, right? Oh yeah, I've done that. Oh yeah. Okay. So when we come back from the new year, the next thing that's happening is our Start Focused call is on January 2nd. So that's Monday. It'll be at 6 p.m. We use our focus guide, which I can send you the link for that so you can make sure you have that ahead of time. But it's just a way to look ahead at the month to really be able to prioritize what matters most, to make sure that it is getting priority space on your calendar, right? And thinking about what are the things that are coming up that I need to start paying attention to, and what are the things that, you know, are commitments that I already have, and what commitments do I want to make to myself, making sure you put yourself on your calendar, and your relationships and your wellness and some of those other areas that we talk about. So that is going to be on January 9th January 2nd. January 9th is going to be our next book club. And we are going to be doing chapters 10, 11, and 12, which is actually, okay, how do we start living out this whole one thing concept? And it's called this truth, the simple path to productivity. So we will go over those chapters the next time that we meet together. And I'm so glad that you guys were here. Those of you who are here live, thank you for adding in your experiences and your thoughts and value. And those of you who are watching in the replay, I trust this has gotten you thinking, and that you'll take some time to really grab something, right? We can't always do everything. So grab one nugget, right? And apply that. So before we go, that's a great way to end. Like, what's one nugget from our conversation today that you want to kind of take with you, whether it's just to let it percolate a little bit, or whether it's something that you want to directly apply right away? Is there something that just kind of stood out in our conversation that you want to move forward?
I think for me, it's just never stop thinking big.
Yeah. Yeah. Because once you do, you'll stop growing, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
To you, Nikki?
That it's okay to not always be, you know, to take the time out for ourselves, to check back and to spend time, and it's like, you know, we can't give what we don't have. So if we need to go back to ourselves and fill that back up so we can go back out and do it again, then that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Right. Yep. Can't pour out of an empty cup, as we often say. And I think for me, it's that reminder of just making sure that I'm always keeping myself close to other people who are also growing, because we can grow so far on our own, right? And all of us are, you know, we're go-getters, and we can do things, and we can, you know, think big things. But I think you kind of, I know for me, I kind of got to that plateau, and there was only so much I could do on my own. And I really started either engaging with a coach, or, you know, doing a community like what Nikki and I did, or, you know, other things like that just started getting me thinking. Even our Redeem Her Time community, right? Just the conversations that we have in there, I'm just blown away by the things that people share and how they're reflecting on what it is that we're talking about and how they're applying it. And we just encourage and learn from one another. So I absolutely love that. Well, thanks for being on today. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your Christmas and New Year celebrations, and we will see you again in the new year.
Sounds good. Merry Christmas.
All right, guys. Thanks for being here.